At 30,000 feet above Chicago, a first-class cabin falls eerily silent. Jessica Morrison, pale blonde and prim in her uniform, steps toward Marcus Wellington with a practiced smile that never reaches her eyes. "Sir, you need to move to economy," she insists, voice clipped. In that moment, the gleam of Marcus's Platinum Elite card does nothing to soften her tone. Around them, smartphones flick on. A fellow passenger's live stream springs to life. Guy First Discrimination. Unfolding in real time. As Marcus calmly locks eyes with the attendant, every viewer becomes a juror in this unfolding drama of prejudice and privilege. This is not just a seating dispute, it's a stark reminder that even at altitude injustice travels first class. Comment below if you've ever witnessed discrimination in unexpected places, and don't forget to subscribe for the next chapters of this high-stakes saga. Marcus Wellington eased into seat 2A, smoothing the crisp lapels of his charcoal Tom Ford suit. The Wall Street Journal lay folded neatly beside his coffee cup, quarterly projections waiting for his keen eye. As Platinum Elite status passenger, he expected the polite nods and muted curiosity reserved for frequent flyers. Instead, Jessica Morrison advanced with her clipboard like a gauntlet laid before him. "Sir, I'm sorry, but you'll need to move to economy," she announced, smile unyielding. Her voice held the practiced warmth of a greeting card, but her eyes betrayed iron resolve. Marcus lifted an eyebrow, calm, undisturbed. He produced his boarding pass, seat 2A, first class, purchased weeks ago, and his elite card, its gold lettering glinting in the cabin light. Around him, passengers whispered, easing their phones into view. A woman in 3B angled her camera viewer count, climbing by the second. "Drama in first class," she murmured into her live stream. "What is this, 1954 at 30,000 feet? Jessica glanced at the manifest taped inside her clipboard. She swallowed. "Mr. Wellington." Mr. Davidson's assistant called ahead. "Mr. Davidson requires this seat for medical reasons." Marcus studied her. "I respect Mr. Davidson's needs. Will you show me his medical documentation?" Her brow creased. "Company policy. But safety policy also says not to discuss passenger medical details." Marcus's tone was near whisper, yet every ear in first class leaned closer. Brad Thompson, head flight attendant with silver at his temples, appeared from the galley. His 20 years of experience had taught him every nuance of conflict resolution, yet the scene puzzled him. He laced his fingers behind his back, studying Marcus with professional scrutiny. "Sir, you're holding seat 2A, meant for our platinum passenger. We need you to comply." Phones clicked. The cabin's golden leather seats felt charged, as if bias itself had weight. Marcus nodded politely, turned to Brad. "Please give me your name and employee ID for my records." Brad stiffened. "I'm Brad Thompson, ID 47221. "Now, sir." "And you?" Jessica, Marcus prompted. "Jessica Morrison, ID 62847. She spat out, voice tighter now. Passengers gasped. Recording devices multiplied. Marcus slipped their IDs into his Mont Blanc pen case, then slid the pen back into his pocket. "Thank you." At that moment, the captain's voice crackled. "Flight attendants, prepare for descent." A reminder. Gravity and protocol pull us all back toward reality. Yet reality had already shifted. A hush enveloped first class. Marcus remained seated, calm posture impeccable. A hush so pronounced it eclipsed the hum of engines. Jessica shot a glance at Brad, who mirrored her uncertainty. The power dynamics warred in that muted space, hers anchored to corporate script, his to years of expertise, yet neither matched the quiet authority of the man they tried to displace. Sarah Chen, live streaming from 3B, narrated breathlessly. "He's not moving. He's got the pass. And they still want him out of his paid seat." Her viewer count soared past 1,200. Comments flooded. "This is illegal. Where's equality in the sky?" The platinum threads on Marcus's card, the faint crest embossed on his leather briefcase, they whispered of corporate might few could rival. Yet his serenity did more. It spoke of a man who knew the game's rules, ready to rewrite them. A flash of text on Marcus's phone boardroom moved to 6 p.m. "Don't be late." He typed a crisp reply. "May be delayed." Brad's voice cracked. We can't delay. Rules are rules. Marcus tilted his head, inviting empathy instead of combat. Then let me comply, Jessica. But first I'd like your station manager's credentials. Jessica's jaw clenched. I am the station manager on duty. Then you must be aware this cabin is governed by anti-discrimination law. Please advise which clause justifies your demand. Her script unspooled beyond recognition. She tapped her earpiece and muttered station manager to cockpit. Brad stepped back, badge tugging at him. He recognized the tension soaring beyond petty authority. Even seasoned crew falter when prejudice meets power it cannot grasp. From the aisle, a hush of clicking shutters fell. A businessman in 1C lifted his phone. They're literally kicking out a first-class passenger for being black. His lens captured the moment with unblinking focus. Marcus allowed himself a small, polite smile. Miss Morrison, Mr. Thompson, I appreciate your dedication. I will relocate once I've documented this encounter fully. He tapped his phone, the click amplified in the hush. They exchanged pained glances. Was this defiance or the ultimate leverage? Very well, Jessica whispered, voice hollow. Please gather your things. Marcus rose, folding his papers with deliberation. Thank you for the education. His briefcase clasp clicked shut. The cabin exhaled as if freed from a held breath. As he made his way to the exit, live stream viewer counts spiked hearts and broke the internet silence. A final CTA, every passenger was witness, every click an indictment. The first act closed on a man displaced yet empowered, a prelude to the corporate reckoning awaiting those who dared question his place in the sky. The cabin's air grew taut, as if everyone aboard held their breath waiting for collision. Marcus Wellington remained seated unhurried as Brad Thompson's glare bore down on him. Jessica Morrison hovered nearby, arms crossed, clipboard clutched like a shield. Sir Brad said, voice low but charged with authority. We've asked you twice. Please move to economy. Marcus lifted his chin slightly, his expression unreadable. I've shown you my valid boarding pass and platinum elite card. Seat 2A is mine. Jessica's lips pressed into a thin line. That doesn't change our instructions. You don't belong here. A murmur rippled through first class, spreading like wildfire. Phones lit up in every row, screens reflected in the cabin's polished brass fixtures. Sarah Chen's live stream counter leaped from 1,200 to 2,000 as she narrated breathlessly. He's standing his ground. They're insisting he isn't in his paid seat. Brad's patience frayed. Mr. Wellington, this is a medical accommodation for another passenger. You're in the way. And yet Marcus replied in measured tones, I requested the medical documentation. Company policy forbids sharing passenger health records publicly. Jessica stiffened, mouth opening, then closing. A bead of sweat formed at Brad's temple. Both attendants glanced at each other, shared a knowing look born of training that taught them to never lose control. But in that moment, they had. From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw the reflection of the departure board behind him. Green Flight 447 en route to LAX and the pulsing clock of real time. His phone buzzed. He discreetly retrieved it, brow furrowing. Board meeting moved to 6 p.m. Don't be late. Critical merger discussion. He typed a quick reply. May be delayed. He set the phone back, gaze flicking to Brad. You see, he said softly, I have somewhere to be. Brad's jaw clenched. Then you'll miss it if you don't move. A hush fell. Even the hum of the engine seemed to recede. Every passenger's eyes were locked on the drama, a lone black man refusing to budge in the face of institutional insistence. The cabin's golden leather seats gleamed under strip lighting as if the very plane held its breath. Jessica swallowed hard, voice quivering despite her efforts to stay calm. If you do not vacate your seat, I'll have to call ground security. By all means, Marcus said. He steepled his fingers in his lap, disarming in its composure. Your names, please. Jessica froze. Brad blinked. The audience, now numbering over 3,000 viewers on Sarah's stream, leaned forward. Brad opened his mouth, then closed it. He exchanged a glance with Jessica, who trembled as she stared at the aisle. I'm Brad Thompson, Senior Flight Attendant, Employee ID 47221. Jessica raised her voice. I'm Jessica Morrison, ID 62847. Marcus nodded once. Thank you. He reached into his jacket pocket, retrieved a Mont Blanc pen, and inked their names neatly on the boarding pass before tucking it away. A collective gasp went through the cabin. Phones flashed. From the intercom overhead, the captain's voice resonated. Cabin crew, prepare for descent procedures. Passengers, please secure your devices. The lullaby announcement should have restored decorum, but instead it underscored the surreal tension. Marcus remained seated, legs uncrossed, coffee untouched, as the world around him strained to process the confrontation. Jessica trembled, glancing at Brad as if seeking rescue from his seasoned presence. But he looked equally uncertain. His decades of service had not prepared him for a challenge so public, so real-time. A ripple of commentary filled Sarah's feed. They can't do this. I'll never fly this airline again. Discrimination at 30,000 feet. Marcus let the words wash over him as he always did with noise knowledge's power. He tapped his temple gently, indicating awareness beyond their performance. Jessica swallowed, voice barely above a whisper. I need to call my supervisor. Brad opened the galley door, beckoned the junior attendant. Ground security, he hissed. At that moment, a hush and thud echoed beyond the first-class curtain, footsteps, and a soft murmur. The door parted, revealing two stock-still figures in airline security uniforms. One veteran with a military bearing, the other fresh-faced and uncertain. The cabin lights shimmered off their badges. Cameras pointed. The veteran stepped forward. We've been called to assist with passenger relocation, sir. His gaze flicked to Brad, then to Jessica. Brad nodded, relief tempered with defensiveness. Thank you. Jessica stepped aside, letting the security officers advance. Marcus exhaled softly, proof that even engines thrummed beside him, life could still slow to the beat of injustice. He rose, briefcase in hand, moving with dignity toward the aisle. Nothing hurried, every step a statement. Every camera encapsulated that stride. As he passed, he allowed a final glance at Brad and Jessica, clear, composed, unwavering. No derision, no triumph, only the knowledge of his power. At that same instant, Sarah's feed jumped again. 356 viewers. He's leaving on his own terms, she marveled. But I don't think he'll stay in economy for long. Brad watched him walk away, then turned to Jessica. We really messed up. Jessica's legs wobbled. What just happened? Beyond the curtain, security awaited Marcus. He paused, raised an eyebrow, and asked them to motion him back to first class. The veteran officer hesitated, consulted his radio. Then, with visible reluctance, he signaled Marcus forward. The entire cabin exhaled, lights switched back on, phones lowered. The brief moment of spectacle dissolved into whispered conversations. Was that legal? Could you be kicked off your own prepaid seat? Marcus returned to 2A as though he'd simply stretched his legs. He resettled himself with the same grace he'd left, placing his coffee back exactly where he found it. A ripple of applause and involuntary surprise burst from the cabin. A few passengers rose to their feet, phones held high. Jessica stood slack-jawed as if the plane itself had performed a trick. Brad covered his mouth, eyes wide. Marcus tapped his wristwatch, a sleek Cartier piece. It's 3:47 p.m., he said quietly, looking at both of them. Only 13 minutes until I land. Let's see who misses their next meeting. The cabin erupted in murmured laughter, relief threaded with righteous indignation. Jessica sank into the nearest seat. Brad stood rigid, guilt and astonishment etched across his face. Phones captured every detail, emails to corporate tweets from passengers, snaps to news desks. Within moments, #SkyFirst discrimination trended nationally. Marcus leaned back, adjusting the fold of his lapels. He had his seat, he had their names, he had it all. And behind him, real-time reverberations suggested the crew's next assignment would be across a conference room table where power shifts come at the highest altitude of authority. Outside the cabin, the plane continued its descent into Los Angeles, engines humming a victory march for dignity under pressure. And inside, the next act of this corporate thriller was already calling minutes away, live, unavoidable. The cabin's ambient hum shifted the moment Brad Thompson pressed the intercom button. His fingers trembled ever so slightly as he looked back at Jessica Morrison, who stood frozen by her clipboard. In the pristine first-class cabin of Flight 447, the unflagging confidence that had defined their careers seconds ago now flickered like a faltering spotlight. Captain Sinclair to first class. Brad's voice crackled through the cabin speakers. Phones clicked on in unison. Every screen pivoted toward the first-class curtain where the captain's silhouette would soon appear. Jessica's breath hitched. She knew that once the captain stepped in, there would be no easy recovery from this spectacle. Moments later, the curtain swished open, and Captain David Sinclair, navy cap squared precisely on his brow, strode into 2A's hallowed ground. His uniform was immaculate, the silver braid on his sleeves shining like a challenge. Marcus Wellington remained seated, legs uncrossed, as if he were the one commanding the plane. Sinclair's gaze snapped from Marcus's calm form to Brad's unsteady posture. "Mr. Wellington," the captain began, voice even, but carrying the authority of the cockpit. "I understand there's been a misunderstanding regarding your seat assignment." Marcus inclined his head in acknowledgement. "Captain, my boarding pass and Platinum Elite status confirm seat 2A. I purchased it 3 weeks ago." Sinclair's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion this time, but with that blade-sharp scrutiny reserved for oddities in an otherwise controlled environment. "I'm afraid we have a medical accommodation request for Mr. Davidson. He requires that seat for health reasons." He cast a swift glance at Jessica and Brad, whose forced nods seemed rehearsed. Jessica's cheeks burned. "Yes, Captain, I'm handling it." Sinclair raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. He turned his gaze back to Marcus, his lips pressed into a thin line. In that pregnant pause, every passenger felt the weight of his judgment. Marcus did not flinch, he only waited. Over Sinclair's shoulder, Jessica's phone camera flitted toward the aisle. Sarah Chen's live stream count jumped to 2,512. Comments buzzed. Captain called in, "This is serious." Medical excuse. "Let's see that documentation." Power trip at 30,000 feet. Brad licked his dry lips. "Captain Mr. Wellington refuses to move." "Understood," Sinclair replied. He reached inside his jacket and tapped a slim black device, his satellite phone. "Sinclair to flight operations. We have a seating dispute on Flight 447. Medical accommodation being claimed. Request verification." His words, delivered quietly yet firmly, rippled through the cabin more potently than any raised voice could. Phones angled toward the cockpit doorway. A hush fell again. People craned their necks, eyes tracking every flick of Sinclair's head, every micro-expression on Brad's face. Inside Marcus's jacket pocket, his iPhone buzzed. He slid out the device, eyes flicking to the screen. Board meeting moved to 6 p.m. "Don't be late." The text wasn't surprising. He'd cleared his schedule for a critical merger discussion, but its timing was impeccable, almost prescient. He tapped a quick reply. "May be delayed." Then he tucked the phone away, his expression never betraying the adrenaline under his calm exterior. Sinclair ended his call. "Thank you. They'll send confirmation in 5 minutes." He looked at Marcus. "Until then, I'll ask you to remain seated." "Certainly," Marcus said politely. The captain turned to Brad and Jessica. "Continue meal service. Everyone else, please relax." With a crisp nod, Sinclair exited through the curtain, leaving behind an atmosphere so charged it could have powered the engines. Conversations buzzed in sotto voce. "That was the captain. They're verifying it. He's got corporate behind him, I bet." Brad exhaled, voice a hoarse whisper. "That was close." Jessica sank into the nearest seat. "What do we do now?" Brad ran a hand through his hair. "We stick to the story. When they send the documentation, we'll ask him to move." But Marcus' briefcase, unopened on his lap, held his ground with unwavering poise. Around him, the cabin's mood tilted toward indignation. Smartphones were raised, higher lenses framing the unfolding drama as if it were a theatrical production. 3 minutes later, precisely at 3:49 p.m., Sinclair's headset crackled again. "Captain to first class. Medical exemption documentation received. Verified by Corporate Health Services. Please comply with the medical accommodation." Brad's eyes darted to Sinclair's doorway and then back to Marcus. His next words hissed with irritation. "Sir, I'm sorry. The documentation is confirmed. You'll need to move." Jessica's clipboard rattled in her grip. Sarah Chen's live stream had climbed to 3,112. "They verified it." "They verified it," Sarah exclaimed. "But watch, he still won't budge." In that moment, Marcus rose with deliberate slowness. The hum of conversation dimmed and the cabin lights seemed to brighten around him. Captain Sinclair. Marcus said, voice carrying to every ear. I appreciate the verification, but I have one request before I comply. May I have everyone's business cards? I'd like to document this interaction fully. Brad froze. Jessica gaped. Phones clicked. The cabin's attention fixed on those two attendants poised between compliance and defiance. Brad recovered first, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a laminated card that read, Brad Thompson, Senior Flight Attendant Employee ID 47221. Jessica followed suit. Handing over hers, Jessica Morrison, Flight Attendant Employee ID 62847. Marcus accepted both with a nod. Sarah's live stream counter exploded to 405. Comments scrolled past in a blur. He's recording them. Collecting evidence. This man's prepared for war. Brad's face drained of color. Jessica's hand shook as she tucked her card away. The two shared a look of dawning terror. This had become far bigger than a misbooked seat. Thank you, Marcus said softly. I'll move now. He lifted his briefcase and strode toward 14B and economy, just as the captain's voice returned this time, calmer, almost admiring. Mr. Wellington, I'll ensure you receive appropriate compensation for the inconvenience, Sinclair announced. Marcus paused in the aisle, turned, and offered one final composed smile. Thank you, Captain. Compensation is not the issue. Accountability is. Then he continued down the aisle, briefcase in hand, every step echoing through the cabin as if marking a path to change. Phones recorded his exit, the silver barrel of his cufflinks gleaming through the lenses. Sarah Chen's live stream reached 4,672 viewers. He walked out on his own terms, she marveled. That was dignity in motion. Behind him, Brad and Jessica watched the last of him disappear. Behind those eyes, something had shifted, a dawning awareness that this flight, once routine, had become a live performance of power exploited and authority questioned. And as Marcus settled into his economy seat, the cabin lights flickered in anticipation of the final act, yet to unfold, an unfolding destined to reach well beyond the fuselage, touching boardrooms, headlines, and the pulse of real-time justice. The cabin lights dimmed just enough to signal the approaching descent, but in that moment, time seemed to stretch for Marcus Wellington. He closed his briefcase with deliberate calm, the latch clicking into place like a well-practiced drumbeat. Around him, the soft murmur of first-class turbulence resumed, seatbelts unclicked, last sips of champagne, final page turns in glossy magazines. Yet every eye remained fixed on Marcus, the man who had turned a simple seating dispute into an unfolding power play at 30,000 feet. He stood straightening the crease in his charcoal suit trousers and turned to face the crew. Jessica Morrison's face was drawn. Brad Thompson's jaw clenched. Neither could hide the tremor in their posture, an instinctive reaction to the gravity of what was happening. Their uniforms, once symbols of authority and protocol, now felt like fragile armor against scrutiny. Before I relocate to economy, Marcus began, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the cabin. I'd like one final piece of information. He rested a hand on the headrest of 2A, the seat they had demanded he vacate, and let his gaze sweep across the assembled attendants. Please provide your employee identification numbers and full names so I can document this interaction accurately. A pregnant silence fell. The intercom had gone quiet. Even passengers in other sections seemed to register the importance of this request. Phones gleamed as they pivoted cameras back to the first-class aisle. Sarah Chen's live stream count climbed above 5,200. Comments flooded in, urging the attendants to comply. This is your moment. Speak up. We're watching. Brad's knuckles whitened as he unclipped his headset. He looked to Jessica, who nodded subtly, both knowing they had little choice. With a stiff exhale, Brad retrieved a small embossed card from his breast pocket. Brad Thompson, Senior Flight Attendant, Employee ID 47221. He handed it to Marcus with a shaky hand. Jessica, trembling visibly, followed suit. She withdrew her wallet and produced a laminated badge bearing her photo and the Sky First logo, Jessica Morrison, Flight Attendant, Employee ID 62847. She placed it on the seatback tray in front of Marcus, then stepped back as if distancing herself from the moment. Marcus accepted their credentials without a word, slipping each card into an inner pocket of his blazer. Then, with the same unhurried precision he'd shown throughout the ordeal, He produced a Mont Blanc pen, uncapped it, and wrote their names and IDs neatly on the back of his boarding pass. Each stroke of ink seemed to underline their shifting fate. The cabin held its breath. For a moment, the only sound was the whir of air vents and the soft hum of the engines. Then faintly, the captain's intercom crackled to life. "Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for landing." Jessica and Brad exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Their window for recovery was closing. The descent, both literal and metaphorical, had begun. Marcus closed his pen and stowed it away. He nodded once to Brad and Jessica. "Thank you," he said, voice carrying a quiet finality. With that, he turned and walked down the aisle, briefcase in hand. The click of his polished Oxfords on the cabin carpet sounded louder than the applause that normally greeted a smooth landing. Behind him, the first-class cabin exhaled. Passengers whispered to one another, eyes wide. A businessman in 1C muttered, "He's collecting evidence," while a woman in 3B snapped a screenshot, her live stream now over 6,000 viewers. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Everyone sensed that this was not the end, but the calm before the real storm. Marcus reached the curtain and paused for a final glance. The baby blue uniforms of first-class attendants appeared almost ghostly in the dim light. He allowed himself the barest hint of a satisfied smile, an acknowledgement of how far the balance of power had swung in mere minutes. Then he crossed into the economy cabin with seamless grace. The contrast was stark. Seat 14B awaited him, wedged between a college student and a businessman with headphones on. Yet Marcus carried himself as though stepping into a boardroom, not a cramped row. He slid into the seat, placed his briefcase carefully on the floor, and clicked his seatbelt into place. His expression remained composed, eyes flicking briefly to his phone. Another text board will convene at 6 p.m. Emergency session. He tapped a quick reply. Understood. Then leaning back, he opened his laptop and began typing subject line, Flight 447, Incident Documentation. His fingers moved with the same precision that had defined every action so far. In the galley behind him, cabin crew busied themselves with service preparations, but their movements felt tentative, as though they were stepping around the epicenter of a corporate quake. Jessica hovered by the curtain, clipboard clutched, while Brad helped stow the last of the meal carts. Neither dared meet Marcus's gaze. A hush fell over economy as passengers noticed him. The college student peeked over his headphones and whispered, "Dude, that was epic." The businessman beside him closed his laptop and gave a small nod of respect. Marcus offered a polite nod in return, his composure unshaken by the sudden shift in cabin allegiance. Far ahead in the cockpit, Captain Sinclair monitored the descent through his visor mirror. He exchanged a look with his co-pilot, an unspoken acknowledgement that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Once they reached the gate, they would not simply taxi to the terminal. They would be preparing for a corporate reckoning. Below on the ground station, manager Carlos Rodriguez glared at his headset. "Station manager to gate 47, he barked, voice tight. "We have an urgent situation. Skyfirst personnel terminated for cause Jessica Morrison and Brad Thompson. I need an immediate meeting in the executive conference room." Within minutes, a low hum of coordinated activity would ripple through the airport. Security personnel, PR teams, and legal staff would converge at the gate, responding not to a mere passenger complaint, but to a live corporate spectacle that had blown open systemic failures. And at the center of it all stood Marcus Wellington, CEO, majority shareholder, and the man whose silent pivot had dismantled the crew's authority with nothing more than a request for their own IDs. As the plane's wheels touched down on the runway, the cabin's collective heartbeat thrummed with one question: what would come next? In that pregnant moment between touchdown and taxi, every passenger felt the weight of history unfolding. A routine flight had become a turning point, proof that a single unhurried gesture of documentation could pivot entire power structures. The final piece clicked into place as the seatbelt sign chimed off. Marcus Wellington was not just relocating to economy, he was taking his seat at a higher table altogether. And once he stepped off the plane, the true boardroom battle would ignite, propelled by the same unhurried precision he'd shown high above the clouds. The gentle thud of tires on the jetway's metal floor signaled that Flight 447 had docked at Gate 47. Passengers around Marcus Wellington leaned forward, expecting perhaps a curt, "Welcome to Los Angeles" from the flight attendant. Instead, the cabin pulsed with anticipation. Phones still glowed in the hands of curious travelers, their cameras trained on the man who had so calmly dismantled the crew's authority at 30,000 feet. Marcus stepped into the narrow corridor, the familiar hush of deplaning passengers fading behind him. The air smelled of jet fuel and anticipation. Flight attendants milled about, gathering meal carts and collecting service trays, their chatter subdued by the weight of what had just transpired. Brad Thompson lingered near the curtain clipboard in one hand, eyes darting back and forth as if searching for an escape route that no longer existed. Jessica Morrison stood by his side, her face pale lips pressed together in a silent apology. Passengers filed out of first class into the jetway, but none moved around Marcus. Instead, they gave him room, their expressions a mixture of awe and solidarity. The college student from 14B offered a small encouraging nod. A businesswoman in 1C whispered a sympathy, offering him a half smile, her eyes glistening. In that moment, Marcus felt neither anger nor triumph. He felt responsibility, the quiet gravity of leadership settling on his shoulders. A flight attendant younger than the rest approached hesitantly with a stack of unused napkins and a boxed snack. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly, voice trembling. "On behalf of Sky First Airlines, I'm sorry." Marcus inclined his head, accepting the napkins with a gracious nod. "Thank you," he replied, voice measured. "Your courage in speaking up matters." The young attendant's eyes widened as she slipped back into the cabin, the crowded hum swallowing her apology whole. Marcus continued down the jetway, his steps deliberate. Upon reaching the threshold of the gate, he paused. The station area beyond was alive with activity, ground staff directing tugs, gate agents scanning badges, passengers lining up for baggage claim. Behind the gate desk sat Jennifer Walsh, the gate supervisor, her head set askew and her posture rigid. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes widening in recognition. Marcus reached into his breast pocket and produced a small stack of business cards, each encased in pristine white stock with gold-embossed lettering. He held them out as though offering the crew a last gesture of empowerment. The first card read simply, "Marcus Wellington, Chief Executive Officer, Wellington Group." Silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Jennifer's mouth opened, then closed, as if buffering between duty and realization. "Mr. Wellington," she stammered, her professional composure fraying. "I wasn't aware." Marcus allowed a patient smile to soften his stern expression. "Now you are." He extended the cards to her, and she accepted them reflexively, fingertips brushing against his. The ripple effect was immediate. Ground handlers nearby froze mid-motion, their conversations cut off. A baggage handler paused with a suitcase on his shoulder. An airport security officer stepped forward, expression averted. The collective understanding was clear. This was no ordinary passenger. As Jennifer recovered, she straightened her posture, pressing the card to her badge lanyard. "Yes, Mr. Wellington? How may I assist you?" She asked, her tone a model of corporate deference. Marcus nodded once and stepped around the desk, placing his briefcase on the counter. "I need to speak with your station manager," he said evenly. "There have been serious personnel issues on Flight 447 that require immediate resolution." Every eye in the gate area watched. Phones lifted again. Sarah Chen, the travel blogger whose live stream had borne witness to every twist of the in-flight drama, caught sight of the business card and gasped. Her camera swiveled to capture the moment Jennifer Walsh received it. Her viewer count ticked upward by the second 6,000, then 7,500, then 10,000. Before Jennifer could dial station manager Carlos Rodriguez emerged from the adjacent office, his crisp uniform now looking as though it had been ironed under duress. He strode forward, expression cautious, until he recognized Marcus. His hands shot to his headset. "Mr. Wellington," he managed, voice tense. How can I?" Marcus held up a hand. "Please, let's not waste time. I want to review the incident report, speak with Flight 447's crew. Captain Sinclair included, and initiate a formal disciplinary action. I'm here to ensure Sky First Airlines lives up to its policies." His gaze swept the gathered employees. Jessica, Brad, Jennifer, Carlos, even the ground handlers who had paused mid-step. Rodriguez swallowed and cleared his throat. "Of course. Right this way, sir." He led Marcus through the glass doors into a small office lined with binders and staff rosters. The cramped space suddenly felt cavernous, the weight of corporate accountability pressing in. Marcus followed every movement tracked by passengers and staff alike. Inside, Rodriguez fumbled with his computer, pulling up the flight manifest and incident log. "Here it is," he said, voice wavering. "Crew, Jessica Morrison, Brad Thompson, Captain Sinclair. Flight time 2:47 p.m. Reports a passenger refusal to comply." He glanced up sheepish. But no mention of their own conduct. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "I filed a report on board," he reminded him. "It's under Flight 447 timestamp 0814. Was it? 2019Z. He offered a small, helpful nod. "You'll find video from cabin cameras, witness statements from passengers, and my live stream documentation arrayed in the evidence folder." Rodriguez's eyes darted to the folder on the desk, clearly labeled Incident 447 Wellington versus Crew. He opened it, flipping through pages of printouts, screen captures, policy excerpts, and cabin video stills. His jaw tightened. "Sir, I... Marcus cut him off with a gesture that brooked no argument. "I'll need official statements from Jessica Morrison and Brad Thompson. I want them here to explain why they refused to verify my status and demanded my removal." Rodriguez swallowed, visibly closing the folder with a snap. "I'll arrange it." Marcus nodded once. "Good." He turned to the door, prepared to re-enter the gate area, but paused to address Rodriguez directly. "I expect a full report on my desk within 2 hours. And Carlos," he looked at the station manager, "I'll need your recommendation on their termination or suspension. No exceptions." Rodriguez blinked, nodding. "Understood," he said, voice tight. Marcus stepped back into the bustling gate terminal. Jennifer Walsh joined him at the entrance, bracing herself against the current of onlookers. "Mr. Wellington," she said, voice low, "I'm so sorry this happened. We'll make it right." Marcus considered her for a moment. "Make sure that rightness is systematic, Jennifer. This isn't just about one flight, one crew. It's about reinforcing the dignity owed to every passenger." She nodded, swallowing hard. "We'll update policies, provide training, whatever it takes." He offered her a brief, genuine smile. "Thank you." As he placed his left hand on the counter to steady himself, Sarah Chen's voice emerged again from her phone. "Everyone stay tuned. The next 5 minutes are going to be unmissable." CEO just stormed the gate. Marcus glanced up to see her frame on his right. She raised her phone, her expression a mix of relief and excitement. He tapped her shoulder. "Thank you for your coverage." She blinked, overwhelmed. "Of course, sir. Anything you'd like me to share?" He shook his head. "Just the facts. And my thanks." She nodded and beamed as if she'd just received the highest endorsement imaginable. Her viewer count flickered above 12,000. Behind them, jets continued to taxi, ground crews prepared for the next departures, and passengers waited in the terminal, but none of it mattered quite so much now. Marcus Wellington had arrived. The man who had been dismissed in first class now stood at the gate, CEO card in hand, rewriting the rules in real time. And as the gate area settled into an expectant hush, everyone present knew this was no longer a story about a seat dispute. It was a story about power, who holds it, how they wield it, and how one quiet revelation can dismantle an entire hierarchy. In that moment, the ultimate authority revealed himself, and the stage was set for accountability at every level. The elevator doors closed with a soft whoosh, sealing the four of them, Marcus Wellington flanked by 2 Wellington Group Counsel, and the trembling flight attendants Brad Thompson and Jessica Morrison inside a polished glass-clad cube suspended above LAX's bustling terminal. The press of onlookers through the glass panels was nothing compared to the weight of what awaited them on the 47th floor. The Sky First Airlines emergency boardroom, a mahogany and chrome chamber where executives wielded power like a scalpel. Brad's polished shoes clicked nervously against the marble floor, a rhythm that seemed far too loud. Jessica clutched her purse like a lifeline, her knuckles pale, but her gaze resolute. This was the reckoning. Marcus said nothing as they stepped off the elevator, allowing the tension to swell. He moved with the deliberate ease of someone who had dismantled careers before breakfast. Inside the boardroom, the long table gleamed under LED panels. Around it sat a dozen figures Sky First's board of directors. Crisis management heads, general counsel, and CEO designate, awaiting a formal vote. At the far end, a 98-inch screen looped Sarah Chen's live stream footage, the confrontation in first class, the crew's dismissive body language, the flash of Marcus's boarding pass, the stunned silence when he revealed his corporate credentials. The footage ran on a silent loop, but its impact reverberated through the room like thunder. Robert Sterling, the board chairman, stood to his full 6'2" height as the doors opened. His silver hair and tailored suit gave him the gravitas of an old-school titan. His eyes, though, were sharp, almost accusatory. "Marcus," he said, voice-measured, "thank you for joining us so swiftly. We've reviewed the initial reports, but we require your account." He gestured to the empty seat at the head of the table. Marcus took the seat with quiet confidence, his counsel slipping silently onto the floor beside him. Brad and Jessica were ushered to seats at the far end beside station manager Carlos Rodriguez, who stood with downcast eyes. Sterling cleared his throat. "The board is gathered on 24 hours' notice. This is not standard procedure," he said, fingers steepled. "The incident on Flight 447 has implications far beyond a cabin disagreement. We're here to understand the facts, determine accountability, and chart a path forward." Marcus leaned back, crossing one leg over the other. He placed his briefcase on the table, unclasped it, and withdrew a stack of folders, evidence binders labeled Flight 447 Incident and Employee Conduct Files. "The facts are straightforward," he began, voice calm but resonant. "At 2:47 p.m., two Sky First crew members, Miss Morrison and Mr. Thompson, directed me to vacate my first-class seat for another passenger with alleged medical needs. I provided valid documentation, a first-class boarding pass purchased 3 weeks prior, platinum status credentials, and corporate affiliation recognized in your system." He flipped through the first binder and placed it on the table. "They refused verification, openly declared I didn't belong, and threatened removal. All of this was captured on cabin cameras, cabin audio, passenger live streams, and my own phone recording. The footage you see on the screen is unedited, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with flight logs. It constitutes clear evidence of discriminatory behavior based on appearance." He nodded toward the screen where the replay of Brad's condescending tone and Jessica's clipped commands played in a loop. General Counsel Maria Santos shifted in her seat. "The video clearly shows our crew members disregarding company policy and federal anti-discrimination statutes. But we need your position on corrective action." Marcus slid a second binder forward. "Here is my demand immediate termination of Ms. Morrison and Mr. Thompson for gross violation of Sky First's anti-discrimination policy, Section 12.4. No appeals. In addition, I require a comprehensive overhaul of training, real-time passenger feedback systems, and a public apology to the passengers of Flight 447. He tapped the binder's cover. "I've also outlined the Wellington Equity Protocol for your adoption." A murmur rippled through the room. CFO Derek Lowe clasped his hands. "Implementing a passenger feedback system across our fleet will require significant capital expenditure. We must weigh optics against costs." Marcus met Derek's gaze. "The cost of inaction is far greater. Legal settlements average $2.3 million annually, plus regulatory fines. Our brand reputation has already suffered. Customer satisfaction has dropped to 3.2 stars. Implementing these reforms not only mitigates risk, but rebuilds trust and boosts long-term profitability." He paused, letting his words settle like stones in still water. Patricia Williams, VP of Operations, cleared her throat. "You're proposing mandatory bias recognition training for all 12,000 employees 40 hours annually. That's unprecedented." He nodded. "Unprecedented times demand unprecedented measures. I'm prepared to champion these reforms, not just for Flight 447, but across your entire network." Sterling tapped a button on his tablet. Instantly, the screen shifted to charts, Q3 discrimination complaint, statistics, projected cost-benefit analyses of the proposed reforms, and a side-by-side of Sky First's brand sentiment before and after corporate communications. The graphs were stark complaints, up 47% legal costs, rising public sentiment plummeting. Sterling leaned back with a sigh. "The board must vote on your recommendations." "Ms. Santos, Ms. Williams, please cast your votes." General Counsel Santos nodded firmly. "I vote in favor. The evidence is overwhelming." VP Williams exhaled and said, "I vote in favor." We cannot ignore systemic issues. One by one, the board members voiced aye or nay. Only Robert Hayes, the regional director on the video feed, hesitated before quietly adding his aye. The vote was unanimous. Sterling rose and looked directly at Brad and Jessica. Miss Morrison, Mr. Thompson, by a unanimous board resolution, your employment with Sky First Airlines is terminated effective immediately. You will receive standard severance in accordance with policy, but no exceptions will be made. You are to be escorted from the premises. Brad's shoulders slumped. Jessica's lips quivered. They had no rebuttal. Their terrible performance had just closed the final chapter of their Sky First careers. Sterling turned back to Marcus. Mr. Wellington, we are grateful for your leadership and transparency. We commit to adopting the Wellington Equity Protocol across our enterprise. We apologize to you and to every passenger who has suffered under our negligence. Marcus closed his binder with a soft clap. Thank you. I expect detailed implementation timelines on my desk by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Let this chapter close and a new era begin. With that, he stood signaling the end of the meeting. His counsel gathered the evidence binders. Marcus stepped out of the boardroom with the calm precision that had defined every moment of this crisis. Outside the doors, station manager Rodriguez waited anxiously. Marcus paused and addressed him quietly. Carlos, your prompt cooperation today is appreciated. I'll need a full report on other pending incidents by Friday. Rodriguez swallowed. Of course, Mr. Wellington. We'll comply. Marcus offered a curt nod and strode toward the elevator, leaving the Sky First Airlines boardroom forever changed. The doors slid shut behind him, and the executives exchanged glances that mixed relief with dawning awareness. In the age of real-time witnesses and viral accountability, no discrimination could go unchecked. The true coup had occurred not on the tarmac or cabin, but within these walls where a single reveal had dismantled complacency and ignited systemic reform. Terminal 4 at Los Angeles International Airport had never been so electric at dawn. The hushed hum of cleaning crews and the distant rumble of arriving jets gave way to a new urgent energy. Flyers passing the gate for Sky First Airlines noticed fresh placards plastered on every column. Bold black lettering on stark white paper declared zero tolerance for discrimination, accompanied by the airline's logo and a tagline, "Respect takes flight." Nearby bias training posters in vibrant hues outlined simple reminders. Every guest deserves dignity and verify, don't assume. Just hours earlier, the same terminal had been the scene of a corporate reckoning, an on-the-spot boardroom coup that saw 2 flight attendants escorted off the plane, their careers ending before the plane even landed. Now that drama was spreading through the airport like wildfire. Reporters fanned out microphones extended toward gate agents, security officers, and even passengers who had witnessed the events. How did Sky First turn a viral discrimination scandal into a swift policy overhaul? They asked, cameras rolling. Inside the gate area, station manager Carlos Rodriguez paced with a clipboard in hand, his crisp uniform and polished shoes no longer enough to mask the urgency in his stride. He stopped to reposition one of the bias training posters at eye level, smoothing out a wrinkle as a film crew from a local news station approached. Mr. Rodriguez, the reporter prompted what led you to post these bulletins overnight. He paused, taking a breath before speaking with the earnest professionalism that had guided him through the crisis. Yesterday, we failed one of our valued customers unintentionally, but in a way that contravened every principle we stand for. This morning, under new directives from our board and our CEO, we're taking immediate action to ensure that no one else experiences what happened on Flight 447. His words were punctuated by clicking shutters and rolling cameras. Elsewhere in the terminal, newly trained ground staff moved purposefully. Young gate agents, fresh from the overnight bias recognition workshop, greeted travelers with extra warmth, their name badges clipped beside pins that proclaimed Equity Advocate. A veteran agent who had spent decades watching the ebb and flow of airport culture nodded approvingly as she affixed a small sticker reading, "I support dignity," in the skies to her badge. Her colleagues followed suit, understanding that these visible tokens of change were more than symbolism. They were a promise. As security personnel performed their routines, their scanners and radios now accompanied by laminated cards reminding them to listen first. Judge never passengers couldn't help but notice. One frequent flyer paused at the security checkpoint, reading the words aloud: "Zero tolerance, dignity for all." He looked up at the uniformed officers with new respect, then moved through the metal detector with a nod. Even the TSA officers had been briefed overnight on the new protocols. Any hint of bias in their screening process would trigger an immediate review. In the food court beyond the gate, digital screens rotated through social media graphics under the banner Sky First Discrimination. A series of tweets from prominent civil rights organizations, screenshots from Sarah Chen's original live stream, and updates on Sky First's public apology all scrolled beneath a headline, "From viral scandal to corporate transformation." Customers stopped eating to watch. A group of business travelers clustered around a news monitor showing a ticker Sky First Airlines stock jumps 3% on swift policy reforms. They exchanged surprised looks, proof that accountability could actually bolster a company's fortunes. Nearby, a phalanx of reporters from national outlets, CNN, MSNBC, even the Wall Street Journal's tech and airline correspondents stood shoulder to shoulder waiting for interviews. One anchor, microphone in hand, approached a uniformed gate agent. "Can you tell us about the new passenger feedback system?" she asked. The agent, who'd been trained just hours before, tapped her tablet and smiled. "Our new in-flight feedback feature allows any guest to report concerns directly to our executive office in real time," she explained. "It's live, it's instant, and it shows that we mean business when it comes to respect." As the morning flight boarded, travelers found personalized apology letters tucked into first-class seat pockets, handwritten notes from Chief Executive Officer Marcus Wellington himself. The letters acknowledged the Flight 447 incident, detailed the immediate corrective actions taken, and promised lasting reform. Recipients murmured appreciatively, their eyes scanning the crisp stationery embossed with the Wellington Group seal. A senior executive on her way to a conference leaned back in 2A, saying, "This is unprecedented, an apology from the CEO at 30,000 feet. It feels genuine." Behind the scenes, the terminal's back office was a flurry of activity. Karen Liu, Sky First's newly appointed Director of Equity Initiatives, supervised the installation of digital kiosks that displayed real-time performance metrics, customer satisfaction scores, discrimination complaint rates, bias training, completion percentages. Her phone buzzed constantly as she coordinated with tech teams, PR staff, and external auditors. She paused only to glance at the numbers. Customer satisfaction was already ticking upward, and discrimination complaints had plummeted to near zero. She allowed herself a quiet smile. The data confirmed that swift, transparent action could indeed transform corporate culture. By midday, Sky First's emergency press release had made headlines nationwide. An immediate policy overhaul, the Wellington Equity Protocol, adopted in full, and a pledge to share the framework with other airlines. In the terminal lounge, a group of travel bloggers compared notes. Some had witnessed the original incident live. Others had followed the tweets overnight. One wrote furiously on her tablet, "This is the airline playbook for the next decade. Accountability in action." As Flight 447's replacement aircraft was prepped for a mid-afternoon return to Chicago, gate staff briefed the crew on the new protocols: 8 hours of bias recognition, training, monthly diversity audits, third-party reporting partnerships, and the creation of a $500,000 annual fund for community aviation scholarships. A young flight attendant responded with a steely nod. She'd been part of the problem yesterday. Today, she would be part of the solution. Out on the tarmac, mechanics and ground crew huddled near the fuselage. They watched the news crews filming from the terminal windows above. One mechanic, wiping grease from his hands, commented to a colleague, "This is bigger than any safety drill. This is safety of people's dignity." His coworker agreed, adjusting the plane's tail at the boarding bridge. "And it's real time. They didn't wait for months of committees. They did something overnight." By late afternoon, the terminal's transformation was complete. Every gate in Terminal 4 bore the new zero-tolerance bulletin. Every uniformed employee, from baristas in the cafe to baggage handlers, wore the Respect Takes flight pin. Digital boards displayed the Wellington Group's equity metrics alongside boarding calls. Passengers moved through the space with a renewed sense of confidence that they would be treated with dignity regardless of their skin color or ticket class. As the sun dipped low over the runway, SkyFirst Airlines' newly appointed Chief People Officer, Dr. Neena Patel, conducted an impromptu town hall in Gate 47's lounge. Dozens of employees gathered phones, stowed notes at the ready. She spoke without notes, her voice ringing clear. "We are not here to rewrite history. We are here to learn from it. What happened on Flight 447 will not define us if we choose to become better, faster, stronger, and more inclusive. The policies we're rolling out in the next 48 hours are not just for show. They are the new standards by which we measure every interaction, every boarding, every landing." She paused, then smiled. "And I expect every one of you to hold yourselves and each other to those standards." That evening, as the final evening flights prepared to depart, a hush fell over the terminal. Screens looping the #SkyFirst Discrimination headlines dimmed to flight departure boards. The terminal lights softened. What had been a place of routine travel had become a crucible of change. In just 48 hours, a single act of discrimination had triggered a sweeping transformation, one that reshaped policies, careers, and public perception. Travelers boarding those flights sensed it. Flight attendants offered extra smiles. Gate agents provided personalized boarding passes with little thank you notes. Security officers wished travelers well with genuine warmth. Terminal 4 felt different, more human, more vigilant, more accountable. Above all, the lesson was clear: when accountability happens in real time, and when authority meets transparency, systems can change overnight. In Terminal 4's gleaming corridors, the blueprint for service equity had been drawn in bold strokes. And as flights took to the skies, passengers carried not just their luggage, but a renewed faith that dignity once lost could be reclaimed and protected by swift, unwavering action. By sunrise, the ripple from Flight 47's confrontation had become a tidal wave, crashing into boardrooms and newsrooms around the world. Major newspapers in London and Tokyo splashed the story across their front pages. "CEO overthrows cabin racism," declared the Times of London. "Airline reinvents itself." After Live's scandal, blared the Japan Times. On television, anchor after anchor replayed Sarah Chen's viral live stream and the subsequent boardroom coup led by Marcus Wellington. Within hours, global audiences had witnessed corporate accountability performed like a well-choreographed heist. Only this time, the target was injustice. In Frankfurt, Lufthansa's CEO, reading the headlines over his morning espresso, slammed his hand on the mahogany conference table. His executive team, assembled for a routine quarterly review, leapt to attention. "We cannot be outflanked by a competitor, especially not under these circumstances," he said, voice low but urgent. Less than an hour later, his airline's diversity chief was on a video call with Wellington Group's Director of Equity Initiatives, Karen Liu, tentatively exploring how to replicate the Wellington Protocol in Europe. Across the Atlantic, regulators at the U.S. Department of Transportation convened an emergency session. Secretary Angela Ramirez, having watched the Flight 447 saga unfold in real time, pressed for immediate action. If one airline can implement systemic reform overnight, she told her senior staff, we must consider mandating anti-bias reporting and accountability measures across the industry. Within days, a notice of proposed rulemaking appeared. Airlines handling domestic flights would be required to publish monthly discrimination metrics and establish third-party complaint review boards. In Sydney, the head of Qantas's customer experience division called an all-hands meeting. Screens around the training center displayed trending Twitter graphics, SkyFirst Discrimination, and Dignity. In transit, alongside news clips of Wellington dismantling prejudice at 30,000 feet. "We are not above scrutiny," she told her team. "If we want to be leaders, we must match SkyFirst transparency." By afternoon, Qantas had announced plans for its own bias detection technology in cabin crew tablets, and a pledge to tie executive bonuses to diversity performance. Meanwhile, in the halls of the European Commission in Brussels, members of the Transport Committee debated new anti-discrimination guidelines. "The Wellington case shows us what is possible," said MEP Claudia Fischer. "We should require every member state airline to adopt similar equity protocols or face substantial fines." Commissioner Lucien Moreau agreed, instructing his staff to draft a directive that would bind all EU carriers to publish annual equity reports and maintain publicly accessible complaint dashboards. Back in Chicago, where the saga had begun, Wellington Group hosted an invitation-only summit at its downtown tower. CEOs from 10 leading North American airlines regulators from the Civil Aeronautics Board and civil rights advocates from the NAACP and ACLU gathered in the 47th floor conference room. On the screen behind them, a looping montage of Flight 447's live stream and the boardroom triumph played silently, an unblinking testament to the power of real-time accountability. Marcus Wellington opened the summit with a simple, unvarnished statement. Yesterday's incident was avoidable, but today's response is replicable. He laid out the core elements of the Wellington Protocol: instant empowerment of affected customers, third-party oversight of bias, complaints, mandatory and measurable bias, recognition training, public reporting of diversity metrics, and executive compensation tied to inclusion goals. Each element sparkled under the suite's ambient lighting as if the very air hummed with possibility. The room buzzed with exchange. One airline CEO leaned forward. "What steps did you take to ensure your employees embraced this shift rather than resent it?" he asked. Karen Liu detailed the intensive but brief immersive workshops that combined interactive simulations, candid storytelling from affected passengers, and direct Q&A with members of diverse communities. She emphasized that the shock of Flight 447's public humiliation was the catalyst. The workshops were the mortar cementing lasting change. A representative from the International Air Transport Association, IATA, took careful notes. "We need a global standard," she said. "If IATA endorses the Wellington Protocol, we can offer a certification for airlines similar to safety audits and inclusive carrier accreditation." Within 2 hours, IATA's leadership had agreed to pilot the accreditation program, inviting 5 carriers to apply in the coming quarter. In Mumbai, Air India's chairman watched the live stream of the summit on his office's oversized projection screen. He called his head of operations. "Implement these measures," he said. "We'll be the first Asian carrier to hold the inclusive carrier accreditation." His board secretary shot off an email to HR and flight operations prepare for policy rollout next week. At the United Nations in New York, a side event at the Human Rights Council featured a panel on aviation equity showcasing the Wellington case as a blueprint for corporate social responsibility. UN Special Rapporteur on Racism. Dr. Nadine Farouk praised the unprecedented confluence of passenger activism, corporate leadership, and regulatory willpower that turned a discriminatory incident into a lever for global reform. NGOs in the audience took furious notes, planning to cite the case in reports on business and human rights. 12 hours after Flight 447's forced removal drama, Wellington Group released an open-source toolkit outlining the protocol's components and implementation guidelines. The toolkit included training modules, sample policy language, communication templates, and technology integration, blueprints everything a carrier needed to get started. Within the first day, the toolkit had been downloaded by legal teams at Delta Emirates ANA and dozens of smaller regional airlines. On GitHub, developers had already begun adapting the bias detection software for different cabin configurations and languages. By the second day, academic interest surged. Business schools announced case studies and workshops. Harvard Business School invited Marcus Wellington to guest lecture in its Leadership and Organizational Behavior course. INSEAD's MBA programs published a white paper analyzing the corporate governance implications of real-time shareholder activism, co-authored by 2 professors who had tracked the settlement clauses in similar discrimination lawsuits worldwide. Meanwhile, the hashtag #DignityInTransit exploded on LinkedIn, where executives posted statements of solidarity and pledged to hold themselves accountable. HR leaders endorsed the initiative. Union heads signaled willingness to integrate diversity metrics into collective bargaining agreements. Legal blogs dissected the FAA and DOT regulatory shifts, predicting a new era of enforceable anti-discrimination statutes in air travel. In Nairobi, a panel at the Africa Aviation Summit spotlighted the Wellington model as inspiration for underregulated markets. Representatives from Kenya Airways and Ethiopian Airlines discussed pilot programs for anonymous passenger feedback systems and community advisory boards mechanisms to catch bias before it became corporate liability. By evening, a coalition of African carriers had formed the Pan-Continental Equity Alliance, chaired by the CEO of South Africa's SAA, with support from NGOs and government ministries. On the third day, an unassuming email arrived at the White House Office of Management and Budget. It was a request for an interagency review of discrimination in public transportation, recommending that the Department of Transportation's new rules be expanded to rail buses and other federally assisted transit. The email cited the Wellington case as evidence that real-time accountability and transparent reporting could improve service equity across all modes of travel. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon in nearly every time zone, journalists recounted the transformation narrative on primetime talk shows and podcasts. This isn't just a story about cabin class, one anchor said. It's a story about power privilege and the responsibility that comes with both. Authors lined up to write best-selling books, how one CEO's composed defiance triggered a global movement, how real-time video and live social media can shape corporate destiny, and how systemic change can happen faster than anyone believed possible. Back in Terminal 4 weeks after the incident, the transformation had crystallized into everyday practice. Passengers noted that crews greeted every name with equal enthusiasm, that digital feedback kiosks prompted unbiased service checks, and that corporate communications highlighted diversity metrics as proudly as safety records. Terminal staff no longer regarded the bias bulletins as a novelty. They were simply part of the fabric of modern travel. In that luminous terminal, as plane after plane lifted off into the night sky, passengers boarded not just with boarding passes, but with the assurance that dignity once lost could be reclaimed by decisive, transparent, and timely leadership. The world had watched, learned, and adapted. What began as a flashpoint of prejudice at 30,000 feet had become a worldwide mandate for inclusive corporate governance. And as flights crossed oceans and continents, the story of Flight 447 lived on. Not as a tale of humiliation, but as a testament to 2 years have passed since Marcus Wellington calmly reclaimed his seat at 30,000 feet and then convened a boardroom coup that reshaped SkyFirst Airlines from top to bottom. In that time, the ripple he created has become a tidal wave of systemic change across aviation and far beyond. It's early morning at Chicago O'Hare Terminal C. A flight attendant clips her wings onto her uniform, glances at her tablet, then looks up with a genuine smile as a family approaches the gate. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Patel," she greets them by name. The Patels exchange surprised smiles. This small moment of personalized welcome is a direct result of the Dignity in Transit initiative that SkyFirst adopted in the wake of Flight 447's scandal. The airline's passenger management system now integrates name-based service prompts, equity dashboards, and real-time feedback loops, ensuring that no traveler ever feels invisible or unwelcome again. In the corporate offices of SkyFirst Airlines, a framed photograph hangs in the lobby, the iconic image of Marcus Wellington standing in the glass-walled boardroom elbow on mahogany table as thousands of live-stream viewers watched him deliver his ultimatum. Beneath it, a plaque reads, "Dignity is a right, not a privilege." That ethos guides every department. On a video wall, a dynamic chart tracks discrimination complaints in real time, because transparency remains the cornerstone of accountability. The numbers tell a story of dramatic progress, a 70% decline in bias-related incidents industry-wide, and among SkyFirst's own metrics, an 82% drop. Business school classrooms now use Flight 447 as a case study in real-time corporate governance. At Harvard, students cluster around small group tables debating the precise moment when Marcus chose leverage over anger. He could have sued, one student observes. But by wielding his shareholder power immediately, he triggered a systemic overhaul. Across the hall in the Baker Library, a professor rewinds the video of that live stream confrontation. "Notice his tone here," she says, pausing the footage as Marcus raises his hand and requests employee IDs. Calm, precise. He refused to concede dignity, but he never lost his composure. Meanwhile, at Stanford's Graduate School of Business, teams of MBA candidates simulate emergency discrimination drills, replicating the Flight 447 scenario down to the boarding pass details. They analyze the speed with which SkyFirst's Crisis Management Unit reconfigured policy, retrained staff, and reestablished trust with passengers. Each cohort emerges with a comprehensive playbook for how to turn a PR disaster into an engine for positive change. But the legacy of dignity extends far beyond academia. In airports around the globe, from Heathrow to Tokyo Narita to Johannesburg's OR Tambo Market Research, indicates that passengers now rank equitable treatment as the third most important factor after price and convenience. Airlines have competed to adopt bias detection software, third-party oversight committees, and monthly respect audits. In Paris, Air France's CEO announced last month that she'll tie 15% of executive bonuses to diversity and inclusion metrics, a direct echo of the Wellington Protocol's demand for personal accountability at the top. At the U.S. Department of Transportation, regulators report that Flight 447 triggered not only new rules for airlines but also spurred similar mandates for Amtrak and Greyhound. We recognized early on that dignity in transit must be universal, says Transportation Secretary Linda Martinez in her office overlooking the Capitol Dome. If one sector can demonstrate rapid, measurable improvement, every mode of travel can follow suit. Her staff released a data dashboard last quarter showing a 64% decrease in transit-related discrimination complaints nationwide, a number that continues to climb downward as agencies implement the same real-time feedback and public reporting mechanisms pioneered by Sky First. On the ground-level terminal, staff surveys tell the most compelling stories of cultural shift. Veteran gate agents who once bristled at new anti-bias training now describe it as essential professional development. Ramp workers share that they feel more empowered to intervene when they witness unfair treatment on the tarmac. Even in remote regional airports, small carriers have adopted the equity kiosk model, an interactive station where passengers can report concerns immediately to a central compliance center. Immediate responses within 2 hours, rather than weeks or months, are now the norm. Back at Wellington Group's Chicago headquarters, Marcus Wellington spends fewer hours in emergency sit-downs and more in strategic planning sessions. His daily briefings start at 8 a.m. sharp, with updates on Sky First's operational metrics, discrimination complaint trends, and the progress of external audits. In the corner of the conference room, a digital ticker counts upward the number of employees certified in unconscious bias training currently. 12, 437, or 97% of the airline's workforce. Yet for all the metrics and boardroom drama, the lasting transformation shows up in quieter moments. On a recent red-eye flight to London, a black teenager traveling alone encountered a steward who greeted her by name as she settled into her seat, then complimented her choice of novel and offered an extra pillow with genuine warmth. "I've never felt more comfortable flying," the teen later posted on social media, tagging the airline and adding #dignity in transit. In Chicago's South Side community, advocates praise the Heritage Equity app, now licensed to dozens of banks, for empowering customers to document and resolve financial service grievances in real time. The model, inspired by Flight 447's live stream accountability, has reduced biased lending practices and increased small business loans to under-resourced entrepreneurs by 31% over 18 months. Nearby at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Dr. Patricia Voss, once a witness to the gate confrontation on Flight 447, leads a hospital-wide initiative to adapt bias reporting kiosks for patient experiences. Healthcare is another arena where dignity is non-negotiable, she notes. If patients can report discrimination immediately, venues can respond with care, not cover-ups. Even pop culture has embraced the narrative. A new streaming miniseries dramatizes the Flight 447 incident with cinematic flare-sweeping aerial shots, pulsating music, and the boardroom showdown in real time. Critics hail it as a gripping fusion of corporate thriller and social justice drama that underscores the stakes of modern leadership. Behind the scenes, the show's writers consulted with Marcus Wellington and his legal team to ensure authenticity, a testament to the drama's enduring relevance. And of course, at the core of this legacy lies a fundamental truth: systems, not just individuals, must change. When Marcus Wellington refused to accept humiliation, he wielded his power not for personal revenge, but to demand structural reform. By doing so, he proved that dismantling injustice requires both authority and a meticulously designed plan for accountability. Now, 2 years on, as flights cross time zones and continents, passengers board with renewed confidence that their dignity won't be conditional on wealth status or appearance. Business schools teach that real-time activism, when paired with shareholder leverage, can catalyze corporate evolution. Regulators enforce new standards, and competitors scramble to stay ahead of public expectation. In every terminal and every boardroom, the Flight 447 story endures as a blueprint. When prejudice arises at altitude, the response must be swift, transparent, and systemic. The legacy of dignity reminds us that a single act of calm courage, channeled through strategic power, can reshape entire industries, and that ultimately, equity moves at the speed of accountability.